Hey fellow gym rats, Nate from Viking Fitness here once again. We're going to start doing a series on the history of powerlifting, specifically powerlifting. We're going to talk about some of the various other sports that influence powerlifting, but over the next few weeks you're going to see a series of videos coming out that are about the history of this awesome sport. And so we're going to start today by talking about what it is now. What is powerlifting in the world now? And mainly what that refers to is it's governed by the IPF, the International Powerlifting Federation. They set kind of all the major rules that trickle down to all the other federations. The USAPL happens to be the one that I lift in, that a lot of people lift in here in the United States. And the main idea is to keep as many people involved in the sport as possible, but to have a good kind of rivalry and competition between people, but not have it be a nitpicky kind of catty sport. And I think they've been pretty successful at developing that over the years. So powerlifting in its current form refers to the three big lifts. They are the squat, the bench, and the deadlift. And those three events have been around for quite a while. In their form now, they've been around since 1972, I believe, is the first championship they held. Wasn't USAPL, IPF standards hadn't been developed yet, but that was the first time that we saw these three lifts really in a national level championship. So where did this all come from? It started, you can actually reach way back, go crazy, and back in Greek times, Roman times, the sports and everything they had there when they were putting on shows for, you know, all the locals and everything there. That developed into the Olympics that we see today. Obviously not the same, but very different, and it has a lot of similarities to Olympic weightlifting, powerlifting, and things like that. Olympic weightlifting is something that is still around today, and we have it all over the place. Powerlifting came out of that, but not necessarily because Olympic weightlifting grew into powerlifting. It's more that powerlifting kind of just evolved next to it. It's something that people, you know, anybody could do. Anybody could train and do it. And I think you can see that even today. You get people of all ages, from, you know, kids all the way up to, I've seen, you know, like 90-year-old people on the platform, and I think that's just amazing. I think that really embodies the sport. But to get back to the history of it, you really see in the 1950s powerlifting itself start to grow, and Olympic weightlifting had started to dive off. It has made a comeback since, but in the 1950s it started to dive off, and the people that made Olympic weightlifting equipment back in the day said, shit, what are we gonna do? They noticed that there were a lot of weightlifters, traditional weightlifters in the gym, people competing locally, but nothing super organized. So this is also the time of Weider and bodybuilding becoming bigger. So there was a focus on, you know, fitness, bodybuilding, weightlifting. It was there. This was, you know, just about the time of Arnold Schwarzenegger. He was coming up in a few years. So I mean, you've got the fervor starting to build, and people wanted to get into it, but not everybody wants to be a bodybuilder. And I think that's really where powerlifting kind of grew out of. So the people that made the powerlifting equipment and the powerlifting magazines back in the 50s, there was Muscle and Strength, and one other one, I can't remember the time, but they kind of started gearing up for powerlifting. Now, it did not start how we have it currently. It wasn't even close. It actually evolved out of a sport called odd lifts in the UK. And odd lifts was your lifts that weren't involved in anything else like Olympic lifting. And there were people that were competing in these odd lift competitions. And at one point there were over 42 sanctioned lifts that you could have in an odd lifts competition. Well, people said that was way too much. We need to have 3. So when you came up into the 50s, the late 50s, you started seeing some local championships pop up, and then they had larger championships pop up. And your first ones were actually, they were the 3, but they were not the three. They were bicep curls, bench press, and squat. And eventually that grew into, fast forward one more step, we have the squat, the bench, and the deadlift in the traditional form that we see it now. That's the overview of where powerlifting came from. The first real national championship was held in 1971. There were no big rules. It was a tiered system, as in lowest weight starts and goes up from there. Weight classes were kind of crazy, if at all existing. There were some that were even missing. They did go pound for pound, as in if you were lighter and lifted the same as somebody who was heavier than you, then you won. And the person who actually won that year in 1971 did just that. So they started to wrangle this in a little bit. And in 1972, it was a much more organized, but you still had a predominantly American sport. You had, I believe, in 1972, there were 16 or 17 American lifters, 4 lifters from the UK, and 1 lifter from the West Indies. So still not a gigantic sport per se at that point, and all the judges were American at that point. But that's where it started, humble roots. And today there's, in the USAPL alone, about 18,000 members here in the US, and growing every year. So just wanted to touch base a little bit on where it comes from. And I think it's important to know the history of the sport, as you would like to know the history of any sport that you play or are even interested in. And as we go forward with this series, we're going to talk about the people that really started it. We're going to break it down into decades, and we're going to talk about the people that really started it, the first real lifters and champions, what happened with equipment, with equipped and non-equipped. I mean, because that didn't even exist at one point. We just had lifting. I believe the first big bench press record in 72 was almost 680 pounds, unequipped, no shirts, nothing like that. But again, the rules are different. I haven't found any video footage anywhere of it, so who knows if it's up to the standards of today. But still, that's a massive amount of weight for any time. So kudos to them. So again, we're going to be talking about all that in the coming weeks, so stay tuned. Come back, check in every Thursday. We're going to have a video out. We got some new equipment here too, so I'm kind of excited about that. Hopefully make the videos a little bit better. But yeah, so history of powerlifting, or Powerlifting 101, coming up over the next 4 weeks. Thank you for joining. Nate from Viking Fitness and Viking Powerlifting down here in Savannah, Georgia.